For 10 years, Sophia Reyes had expertly avoided this night. A decade since she'd fled a life that was suffocating her, a life personified by her ex-husband, Mark Peterson. But the 10-year high school reunion was an unavoidable gravitational pull, a milestone she felt compelled to face. She'd built a new world for herself, one of color success and genuine love. Yet the ghost of Mark's condescending smirk still haunted her quietest moments. She told herself she was going for closure to prove to herself she was no longer that timid girl he'd almost broken. She had no idea that tonight wasn't about her past. It was about the spectacular collision of her past and her present, a collision that would leave everyone, especially Mark, in stunned silence. The invitation had arrived 3 months ago, a glossy cardstock rectangle that felt heavier than it should. Northgate High Class of 2015 10-year reunion. Sophia had stared at it, her finger tracing the familiar school crest, a roaring lion that had always seemed more like a whimpering kitten. Her first instinct was to toss it into the shredder along with the junk mail and old utility bills. It was a relic from another life, a life she had meticulously dismantled and rebuilt from the ground up. Her husband Liam had found her staring at it that evening, a frown creasing her brow. He came up behind her, wrapping his strong arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. His presence was a warm, comforting weight. "Deep in thought, Soph," he'd murmured, his voice a low, gentle rumble. She'd sighed, leaning back into him. "It's the reunion." "Ah," he said, understanding immediately. He knew the broad strokes of her first marriage, the carefully edited version she was comfortable sharing. He knew it had ended badly, that it had left scars. He never pushed for details, a quality she cherished more than anything. He trusted her with her own history. "You don't have to go." "I know," she'd said, turning in his arms to face him. His eyes, the color of a warm forest green, were filled with concern. "But a part of me feels like I should. Like I need to see that place, those people, and not feel like that scared little girl anymore. I want to close that chapter for good." Liam had gently brushed a stray strand of dark hair from her face. "Then I'll clear my schedule. I'll go with you." Sophia had smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you, but no. This is something I need to do on my own. It's my ghost to exorcise. Besides," she teased, "you'd be bored out of your mind listening to Todd Gable recount his single touchdown in the 2014 regional playoffs for the 100th time. He chuckled, the sound vibrating through her. "All right, but you call me the second it stops being empowering and starts being a pain. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Dragon Slayer armor and all." Now standing in front of the full-length mirror in their spacious bedroom, that conversation felt a lifetime ago. The reunion was tonight. The dress she wore was a deep sapphire blue, elegant and understated. It was a stark contrast to the clothes Mark used to prefer she wear, beige, gray, muted tones that helped her blend into the background. "You have such a classic, quiet beauty, honey," he used to say. "No need for loud colors." It was a backhanded compliment, a verbal cage designed to keep her small. Her best friend Jessica Chen was on FaceTime. Her face a pixelated image of encouragement propped up on the dresser. "You look incredible, Soph. Like, walk in and make every single person regret their life choices incredible." Sophia laughed, a nervous flutter in her chest. "Easy for you to say. You're 1,000 miles away sipping wine in your San Francisco apartment. You don't have to face the Peterson platoon." Jess's expression sobered. "He's going to be there." "Of course he is," Sophia replied, adjusting a delicate silver necklace Liam had given her. "He was Mr. Popular, king of the Northgate Lions. He wouldn't miss a chance to hold court and remind everyone how successful he is." "Successful at being a mid-level regional manager for a copier company?" Jess scoffed. "His LinkedIn profile is the most inflated piece of fiction since Moby Dick. And I bet he brings his new wife, what's her name?" "Brittany." Sophia supplied the name, leaving a sour taste. "And yes, her Instagram story this morning was a picture of their outfits captioned, 'Ready to see some old faces, #blast from the past, giant power couple.'" Jess groaned dramatically. Ugh. She's the human equivalent of a pumpkin spice latte. All fake sweetness and basic. Just remember who you are, Sophia. You're the owner of Reyes Design. You have a 2-year wait list for clients. You've been featured in Architectural Digest. He sells toner cartridges. I know, Sophia said, but the old anxiety was a cold knot in her stomach. It wasn't about professional success. It was about the personal narrative Mark had so expertly woven during their divorce. He'd painted her as flighty, unstable, an artist, with her head in the clouds who couldn't handle the realities of a serious life. He'd told their mutual friends she'd left him because she didn't want the responsibility of a family, that she'd chosen her silly little hobby over their marriage. The truth that he had systematically belittled her isolated her from her friends and crushed her confidence until she felt like she was drowning was a story she'd kept to herself. It felt too private, too humiliating to share. She took a deep breath, meeting her own eyes in the mirror. Jess was right. She wasn't that person anymore. The woman looking back at her was poised, confident. The fear was just an echo. Okay, she said both to Jess and herself. I'm doing this. I'll text you if I need an emergency extraction. You've got this, Jess affirmed. Walk in there, smile, be gracious, and let your sheer existence be your revenge. And Soph, don't forget you won. You got out, and you built a life he couldn't even dream of. Hanging up, Sophia grabbed her clutch from the bed. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Liam. Thinking of you. You are the most brilliant, talented, and beautiful woman in any room you choose to enter. Go show them. I love you. A real smile, warm and genuine, spread across her face, chasing away the last of the shadows. He always knew what to say. With that message as her shield, she walked out of her beautiful, peaceful home and drove towards the noise of the past. The reunion was being held at the old Lakeside Country Club, a place that reeked of old money and faded glory. As she pulled into the parking lot, she saw a familiar leased silver BMW parked near the entrance. Mark was here. Taking one last deep, fortifying breath, she got out of the car, the click of her heels on the pavement sounding like a battle cry. The ballroom of the Lakeside Country Club was a sensory assault. A washed-up DJ was playing a set of painfully nostalgic mid-2010s pop hits, the bass thumping just a little too loudly. The air was thick with a cloying mix of perfume hairspray and the faint, greasy scent of cocktail meatballs. People were clumped together in loud, laughing circles, their name tags featuring awkward, youthful yearbook photos stuck crookedly to their chests. For a moment, Sophia felt a wave of vertigo. It was as if no time had passed. The same cliques had reformed as if by magnetic pull. The jocks were by the bar, their bodies thicker but their bragging just as loud. The cheerleaders, now mostly mothers with carefully curated Instagram feeds, were huddled near the photo booth. The nerds, many of whom were now successful tech entrepreneurs and doctors, were quietly and smugly observing the scene. She spotted Jessica's advice giver, Todd Gable, holding a beer and loudly recounting a story to a captive audience, his face already flushed. She managed to slip past him with a polite nod, making her way toward a quieter corner to get her bearings. Sophia Reyes, is that you? The voice was friendly, and Sophia turned to see Karen Miller, a woman she'd shared a few art classes with. Karen had been quiet and kind, one of the few people who hadn't treated Sophia's passion for painting as a cute but ultimately useless hobby. Karen, hi. It's so good to see you, Sophia said, genuinely pleased. You too. Wow, you look amazing, Karen said, her eyes wide with appreciation. I follow your company on Instagram. Your work is just breathtaking. That beachfront house in Malibu, I almost died. A warm flush of pride spread through Sophia. Thank you so much. That means a lot. What are you up to these days? They fell into easy conversation. Karen was a pediatric nurse married with 2 young boys. She spoke about her life with a calm contentment that Sophia admired. It was a pleasant, normal reunion conversation, and for a few minutes Sophia allowed herself to relax. The knot in her stomach began to loosen. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. And then she felt a change in the room's atmosphere. A voice, slick and loud and sickeningly familiar, cut through the din. "Well, look what we have here. If it isn't Northgate's own Vincent van Gogh." Sophia's spine went rigid. She didn't have to turn around to know who it was. The nickname, once a term of endearment, had been twisted into a weapon in the last years of their marriage, a shorthand for unstable, starving artist. She slowly turned. Mark Peterson stood there, a smug, self-satisfied grin plastered on his face. He looked the same, but less. His hair was a little thinner, his stomach a little softer beneath his tailored, too-tight suit jacket, but the arrogance in his eyes was as potent as ever. Clinging to his arm was a blonde woman with perfectly curled hair and a dress covered in a gaudy designer print. Brittany. "Mark," Sophia said, her voice cool and even. "Brittany, nice to see you." "You too, sweetie," Brittany cooed, her eyes doing a swift, dismissive scan of Sophia's dress. "It's just so brave of you to show up, all alone and everything." The condescension was immediate and suffocating. Sophia felt Karen tense beside her. "I wanted to see some old friends," Sophia replied, simply refusing to take the bait. Mark laughed, a loud, performative sound meant to draw attention. A few nearby conversations faltered as people turned to look. "Friends, right. I seem to recall your only friend was a canvas. I'm Mark Peterson, by the way," he said, extending a hand to Karen, completely dismissing her presence until that moment. "I think we had history together." He then gestured grandly toward Sophia. "This is my ex-wife. She was always the creative type." He said the word creative as if it were a diagnosis for a terminal illness. The air crackled with tension. This wasn't a friendly greeting. It was the opening salvo of a public execution. "We all know who she is, Mark," Karen said, her tone clipped. "And we know what she does. Her work is incredible." Mark's smile tightened at the edges, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes at being challenged. "Oh, for sure, for sure. Her little design business. It's great. Keeps her busy, you know. I always said it's important to have a hobby." A hobby. Years of grueling work building a business from scratch. Landing high-profile clients, managing a team of 10 people. All of it reduced to a hobby. It was his classic move, diminishing her accomplishments to bolster his own fragile ego. "It's a bit more than a hobby, Mark," Sophia said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Of course, that's our Sophia, always so serious about her projects," he said, patting her arm in a patronizing gesture she instinctively flinched from. "Listen, we're heading over to the bar to get a real drink. You should see the house Brittany and I just bought in Willow Creek. 5 bedrooms, a 3-car garage. The works. The commission I pulled in last quarter was insane. The copier game is surprisingly lucrative when you're at the top." He was building his gilded cage right in front of her, brick by golden hollow brick. He was re-establishing the old dynamic, casting himself as the successful stable provider, and her as the whimsical, struggling artist he'd been so burdened by. "That's nice for you," Sophia said, her jaw tight. "It is," Brittany chirped, squeezing his arm. "Mark is such a good provider. He knows what's important in life. A stable home, a family, the things that really matter. Not just paint colors and throw pillows." The insult was so blatant, so perfectly aimed, that it took Sophia's breath away. She could feel the eyes of those around them watching this little drama unfold. She had wanted to walk in here as a new person, strong and independent. But in a matter of seconds, Mark had her right back where he wanted her, small, silent, and trapped. The encounter with Mark and Brittany left a bitter taste in Sophia's mouth that no amount of sparkling water could wash away. She tried to mingle, to reconnect with people like Karen, but the shadow of her ex-husband loomed over the evening. He seemed to be everywhere, his voice always the loudest in the room, his laughter a sharp grating sound. He was holding court a king on a cardboard throne, and he wasn't finished with her yet. She was talking to a small group near the silent auction table when he approached again, this time with a few of his old football buddies in tow, including Todd Gable. Mark draped a familiar heavy arm around Todd's shoulders, a gesture of male camaraderie that was both performative and possessive. Guys, you remember Sophia?" Mark announced, his voice booming. His audience turned to her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and pity. He had effectively created a stage, and she was the unwilling star. "We were just talking about the good old days," Mark continued, his grin wide and predatory. "Remember that trip to the lake house, Todd? The summer after graduation?" Todd chuckled. "Yeah, man, good times." "And remember what Sophia spent the entire weekend doing?" Mark asked, looking around the circle, drawing them in. "Not swimming, not hiking with the rest of us. No, she was locked away in the guest room painting a bunch of, what were they, honey, moody-looking trees?" A few people chuckled awkwardly. Sophia felt a hot flush creep up her neck. She remembered that weekend perfectly. Mark had belittled her for bringing her art supplies, calling it antisocial. He'd jokingly hidden her favorite brushes. She'd painted those trees because it was the only way to escape his constant negativity. "I enjoyed it," she said, her voice thin. "Oh, I know you did," Mark roared, as if she'd just proven his point. That was the whole issue. She was always in her own little world. Had her head so far in the clouds she couldn't see the real world right in front of her. He leaned in conspiratorially, lowering his voice just enough to make it seem intimate, though it was still loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'll be honest with you guys, being married to an artiste, it's not what it's cracked up to be. It's all emotions and moods, and I need my space to create." He mimicked her in a high, mocking tone, waving his hands around dramatically. The cruelty was breathtaking. He was taking her personality, the very essence of who she was, and twisting it into a caricature for public amusement. "That's not fair, Mark," Sophia said, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to keep it steady. "Isn't it?" He shot back, his smile vanishing, replaced by a look of faux sincerity. "I supported you. I paid the bills while you were trying to sell those little paintings at the weekend farmer's market for $20 a pop. Remember that, standing out there in the heat next to the guy selling organic kale? It was embarrassing. For me. But I did it because I believed in you." The lie was so audacious it stole her breath. He hadn't supported her. He'd complained about the cost of her art supplies, the time she spent painting the mess she made. He'd once suggested she get a real job as a receptionist to contribute something to the household. "I was trying to build something," she whispered, more to herself than to them. "You were building a fantasy," he corrected sharply. "Our marriage was failing. Our finances were a mess because you refused to be a partner. You wanted a patron, not a husband. I wanted a wife, a family. I wanted a real life. And you just couldn't handle the pressure. You ran away." He delivered the final line with a shake of his head, a performance of a man still wounded by a flighty, irresponsible woman. He had completely rewritten their history, painting himself as the stable, long-suffering victim and her as the dreamer who had selfishly destroyed their life together. Todd Gable nodded sympathetically. "That's tough, man. Some people just aren't built for commitment." Sophia looked around the circle. No one met her eyes. In their silence, they were complicit. They were buying the story Mark was selling because it was easier, more dramatic. It fit the neat little boxes they had for people from high school. Mark, the successful go-getter. Sophia, the quirky art girl, who couldn't cut it in the real world. She felt utterly and completely alone, stripped bare and humiliated in front of people she had once shared classrooms and dreams with. The room felt like it was closing in the music, a dull, throbbing headache. She had been a fool to come here. She thought she could face her past, but she hadn't realized her past would have an audience, a script, and a director so hell-bent on her destruction. I have to go," she stammered, turning to flee. She couldn't breathe. The air was too thick with his lies. "Yeah, that's what you're good at, isn't it?" Mark called after her retreating back, his voice dripping with venomous triumph. "Running away when things get real." His words were like stones hitting her back, each one a painful reminder of the power he once held over her, a power she now realized to her horror he still wielded in the court of public opinion. Sophia didn't make it to the exit. She stumbled into the women's restroom, the cold tile and fluorescent lights a stark, sterile shock after the dim, noisy ballroom. She locked herself in a stall, pressing her forehead against the cool metal of the door, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. Tears she had sworn she wouldn't shed burned at the back of her eyes. It wasn't just the public shaming. It was the calculated precision of his attack. He had targeted her deepest insecurities, the very ones he had cultivated during their marriage. He had called her weak, a failure, a runaway, and he had done it with a smile. The worst part was that a tiny, terrified part of her, the ghost of the girl she used to be, was starting to believe him. She took a few deep breaths, trying to pull herself together. "You are not that person anymore," she told herself, the words a desperate mantra. "You are strong. You are successful. He is nothing." After a few minutes she felt composed enough to face the mirror. Her reflection looked pale and haunted. She splashed cold water on her face, the shock helping to clear her head. She wouldn't let him win. She wouldn't let him chase her out. She would walk back into that room, find Karen, say a polite goodbye, and leave with her head held high. That would be her victory. Steeling her resolve, she pushed open the restroom door and walked back toward the ballroom. The music was louder now, the crowd more boisterous. She scanned the room, trying to locate a friendly face, but before she could, a hand clamped down on her arm. "There you are. Thought you'd left without a proper goodbye." It was Mark. His grip was firm, proprietary. The smell of whiskey was strong on his breath. His entourage had dissipated, leaving just him and a silent, watchful Brittany. "Let go of me, Mark," Sophia said, her voice low and firm. He ignored her, his eyes glinting with a cruel intensity she knew all too well. It was the look he got right before he was going to say something truly unforgivable. "You know," he began, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "I was just telling Brittany about the time you were so sure you were finally going to make it. That little gallery in the city, the one downtown, you begged me to co-sign the loan for the rent. You put all your heart into it." Sophia froze, her blood turning to ice. "Don't. You had that opening night." He continued, a sadistic smile playing on his lips. "You invited everyone. You wore that green dress. You were so hopeful. And how many people showed up? 3, and one of them was your mother. How many paintings did you sell that night, Sophia?" "Stop it," she pleaded, her voice cracking. The memory was a raw, open wound. It had been her first real attempt at a professional gallery space. She'd poured all her savings into it. The opening had been a catastrophic failure, due in part to a massive storm that had shut down half the city, but Mark had never let her believe that. He'd framed it as a personal rejection of her talent. "0, he answered for her, his voice dripping with mock pity. "Not a single one. I remember you crying in the car on the way home, just sobbing. I had to be the strong one as always. I had to be the one to tell you the truth, that maybe you just weren't cut out for it." He was stripping her of her dignity piece by painful piece, relishing her agony. But he wasn't finished. He saved his final, most venomous dagger for last. "It's for the best, really," he said, shaking his head sadly. "You were so stressed back then, so obsessed with your art. It's no wonder you couldn't, it's no wonder we lost the baby." The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. The air rushed from her lungs. The miscarriage. The most private, devastating pain of her life. They had been trying for a baby, and for a brief, joyful period, they had been successful. Then at 10 weeks it was over. She had been shattered. Mark had been distant, almost annoyed, treating her grief as an inconvenience. He had never once in all the years since brought it up. Until now. To use it here in this place as a weapon to prove a point that her ambition, her very nature, had made her unfit to be a mother, was an act of such profound cruelty that she could barely comprehend it. "You were just too fragile." he finished, finally releasing her arm. He looked at her, his expression one of a concerned doctor delivering a grim diagnosis. Some women are meant to be mothers and wives, and some are meant to play with paint. I'm just glad I found a woman who knows what's really important. He patted Brittany's hand, who looked at Sophia with an expression of pure, smug pity. The room around Sophia dissolved into a meaningless blur of light and sound. The music, the laughter, the faces, it all faded away. There was only the cavernous, echoing silence of Mark's final devastating blow. The tears she had been holding back now fell freely, hot tracks of shame and grief tracing paths down her cheeks. He hadn't just humiliated her. He had desecrated a sacred memory. He had broken something deep inside her all over again. She turned blind and stumbling with only one thought in her mind: escape. She had to get out. Now. Sophia was a breath away from bolting through the main entrance, ready to flee into the cool anonymity of the night, when the grand double doors of the ballroom swung quietly inward. Her vision was blurred by tears, her entire being focused on escape, so she barely registered the figure who stepped inside. He wasn't large or imposing. He didn't stride in with an air of importance. He was simply a man in a well-tailored dark gray suit, no tie, the top button of his crisp white shirt undone. He had dark, slightly wavy hair and a calm, focused expression. He paused just inside the doorway, his green eyes scanning the room, not with the frantic energy of someone late to a party, but with the quiet, deliberate patience of someone looking for something specific, something precious. The DJ had just transitioned into another thumping, bass-heavy track, and the energy in the room was high. No one seemed to notice the newcomer. He was an island of stillness in a sea of raucous motion. His eyes swept past the bar over the dance floor and finally settled on the far side of the room, where a lone woman stood, her back to him, her shoulders trembling. He saw her raise a hand to wipe her cheek, and his calm expression tightened with an almost imperceptible flicker of concern. He started walking. He didn't hurry, but he moved with a fluid, undeniable purpose that parted the crowd without him ever seeming to push. People subconsciously made way for him, their conversations faltering for a split second as he passed, as if sensing a shift in the room's gravitational field. Mark, still basking in the afterglow of his vicious victory, noticed the movement. He saw this stranger making a direct line for Sophia. His expression soured his possessive instincts, even for an ex-wife flaring to life. Who was this guy? Sophia, her hand on the door's push bar, heard a voice cut through her haze of pain. It was quiet, yet it seemed to silence everything else. Soph. She froze. She knew that voice better than her own heartbeat. It was her anchor, her safe harbor. Slowly she turned around. Through her tear-filled eyes she saw him. Liam. He was here. His face was etched with worry as he closed the final few feet between them. He reached her and gently took her by the elbows, his touch both a question and a statement of support. He didn't care that they were in a crowded room. His entire world, his entire focus narrowed to her. "Sophia, you okay?" he asked again, his voice a low murmur meant only for her. He saw the tear tracks on her cheeks, the raw pain in her eyes. "You weren't answering your phone. I got worried." He had been tracking her phone, a safety feature they'd set up for when she did site visits in remote locations. He had seen her car hadn't moved from this location for hours, and her phone had gone straight to voicemail twice. A knot of unease had prompted him to leave his own charity dinner across town. He had told himself he was just being overprotective, but the instinct had been too strong to ignore. Now, seeing her face, he knew he had been right to come. Sophia couldn't speak. She just shook her head, a fresh wave of tears welling up. A sob caught in her throat, a mixture of profound relief and a renewed sense of the deep hurt she felt. She sagged against him, and his arms instantly came around her, pulling her into a protective embrace. He held her securely, one hand cradling the back of her head, his chin resting on her hair. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't demand an explanation. He just held her, offering silent, unconditional comfort. He was her shield, and she leaned into his strength, anchoring herself to his steady presence. Mark watched the scene from across the room, his face a mask of contemptuous disbelief. He saw this man holding his ex-wife, comforting her. The sight ignited a fresh spark of arrogant fury within him. Who the hell did this guy think he was, some new boyfriend she'd picked up? He looked like nothing special, just another guy in a suit. With Brittany trailing in his wake, Mark started walking toward them, a condescending smirk already forming on his lips. He was about to put this interloper in his place and deliver the final crushing blow to Sophia's disastrous evening. He had no idea he was walking toward his own annihilation. Mark watched the scene from across the room, a sour cocktail of jealousy and contempt churning in his gut. He saw the stranger's arms around Sophia, her face buried in his chest, and a possessive primal rage ignited within him. It was an illogical fury. He didn't want Sophia, not anymore, but the sight of her seeking comfort from another man felt like a personal affront, a rejection of the narrative he had so carefully crafted all night. He saw it as weakness, her running into the arms of the first man who showed her a sliver of kindness. He was going to expose it, and him for what they were. With Brittany trotting to keep up, he began his walk across the ballroom floor. It was a victory lap. He moved with the unearned confidence of a man who believes he is the most important person in any room. His shoulders were back, his chin was up, and he wore a condescending smirk that he had perfected in 1,000 sales meetings. He felt the eyes of his old classmates on him, and he reveled in it. They had seen him put his flighty ex-wife in her place, and now they would see him vanquish her mysterious new protector. It was the perfect ending to his triumphant return. The couple near the doorway seemed to exist in a bubble of their own creation. The man, this stranger, had his back partially turned to the room, his entire posture a shield around Sophia. His voice when he spoke to her was a low, soothing murmur, the words inaudible but the intent clear. He was a safe harbor, and Sophia was the ship finally reaching shore after a brutal storm. This quiet intimacy was an affront to the loud public spectacle Mark had been curating. He intended to shatter it. "Well, well, well," Mark's voice boomed, slicing through the air. It was deliberately loud, designed to draw attention and break the private moment. He stopped a few feet away, planting his feet in a wide, confrontational stance. "Look what the cat dragged in. Found yourself a shoulder to cry on, Sophia. You always did move on fast." Liam didn't immediately release Sophia, but he lifted his head, turning it slowly. His calm green eyes, which had been filled with tender concern for his wife, now settled on Mark. There was no anger in them, not yet. There was only a cool, piercing assessment, like a geologist examining a common rock. He was taking the measure of the man who had caused this damage. Sophia stirred in his arms, pulling back just enough to look up at him, her eyes pleading. "Liam, let's just go," she whispered, her voice raw. The last thing she wanted was more confrontation, more spectacle. "In a minute," Liam murmured back, his thumb gently stroking her arm in a reassuring gesture. His attention returned fully to Mark, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry you are—" The simple, polite question was somehow more insulting than any slur. It dismissed Mark's entire existence. Mark's smirk tightened into a sneer. "I'm Mark Peterson, her ex-husband," he said, infusing the title with as much significance as he could muster. "The guy who paid for her art supplies before she decided to fly the coop." "And you are—" Before Liam could formulate a reply, a strangled noise came from the periphery. It was a panicked gasp, sharp and loud in the charged silence that had fallen around them. All eyes swiveled to the source, Todd Gable. Todd, who had been enjoying the drama from a safe distance, now looked as if he'd seen a ghost. His face, which had been flushed with alcohol and bonhomie, was now the color of bleached bone. His beer bottle tilted precariously in his hand, its contents threatening to spill. He was staring not at Mark or Sophia, but at the quiet stranger, his eyes wide with a dawning, electrifying horror. He looked like a man who had just realized the harmless garden snake he was poking with a stick was in fact a king cobra. "Oh my God." Todd breathed the words barely audible. He took a shaky half-step forward, his hand raising slightly as if in a warding-off gesture. He was squinting his brain furiously, trying to reconcile the impossible image before him. It couldn't be. Not here. Not at a Northgate High reunion. Mr. Beaumont, is that really you? The name dropped into the atmosphere like a chemical agent instantly changing its composition. Beaumont. To half the room the name meant nothing. It was just a name. But to the other half, the ones in finance and marketing and tech, in any corner of the city's professional landscape, it was a name that commanded a unique mixture of awe and terror. A woman who worked in commercial real estate audibly gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Beaumont," she whispered to her husband. "Did he say Liam Beaumont?" Her husband's eyes widened. "No way. The guy building the waterfront district. The one who owns half of downtown?" The whispers ignited, spreading through the crowd like a lit fuse racing toward dynamite. The sound of frantic typing on smartphones filled the air. People weren't just curious. They were desperately seeking confirmation. They were Googling the name, their faces illuminated by the pale blue light of their screens. Then came the collective staggered intake of breath as the search results populated. Photos appeared on screen after screen. The same man with the same dark wavy hair and calm green eyes, shaking hands with governors, standing on stages giving keynote addresses. His face plastered across the covers of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal, next to headlines containing words like billionaire visionary, real estate titan, and the man reshaping the city. The quiet man in the simple, elegant gray suit was not a new boyfriend. He was not a project. He was an emperor, and Mark Peterson had just tried to bully an emperor. Mark stood frozen, the blood roaring in his ears. The name echoed in his head, a deafening funeral toll for his ego. Beaumont. Liam Beaumont. The pieces of the puzzle began to slam together in his mind with nauseating force. The understated but clearly bespoke suit. The quiet, unshakable confidence that had so irritated him. Sophia's serene glow that he had mistaken for delusion. It wasn't a fantasy she was living in. It was a reality so far beyond his comprehension that he hadn't been able to see it even when it was standing right in front of him. The entire foundation of his evening, of his very identity, crumbled to dust. His promotion at the copier company, his 5-bedroom house in the suburbs, his leased BMW, all the things he had flaunted as symbols of his supreme success, were rendered utterly laughably insignificant. He was a child with a plastic toy, bragging to a man who owned the factory. Liam's gaze flickered briefly to the terrified Todd Gable. He offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. "Mr. Gable." Todd looked as if he might simultaneously faint and pledge fealty. Then Liam's full, undivided attention returned to Mark. The calm, assessing look was gone. The concern he held for his wife was still there, but it had been forged into something new, something infinitely more dangerous. He had now connected all the dots: the condescending title of ex-husband, the public humiliation, the story of pain that Sophia had only ever shared in fragments, and the fresh tear tracks on her beautiful face. The air around him grew cold. The quiet husband had receded, and the titan of industry was now looking at Mark Peterson. He was no longer just a man who had made his wife cry. He was a liability, a problem, an unpleasantness that needed to be swiftly and efficiently removed. The silence that fell over that corner of the ballroom was not merely an absence of sound. It was a physical presence. It was a thick, heavy blanket that smothered the nearby conversations and seemed to warp the very air. The thumping bass from the DJ's speakers continued its relentless, cheerful rhythm, but it felt a world away, the soundtrack to a party that was no longer happening here. Here in this pocket of stunned humanity, a different kind of drama was reaching its chilling crescendo. Every eye was locked on the 3 figures at its center, watching a complete and total inversion of power unfold in real time. Mark Peterson, who had sailed through the evening on a tidal wave of his own arrogance, was now frozen, a statue of crumbling bravado. The smirk he had worn like a crown was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of disbelief. His face, flushed with victory just moments before, had drained of all color, leaving behind a pasty, sickly pallor. He was looking at Liam Beaumont, but he wasn't just seeing a man. He was seeing a symbol, an entity from a world so far above his own that he couldn't have conceived of it, let alone insulted it. The name Beaumont echoed in the cavernous spaces of his mind, dismantling every lie he had ever told himself about his own importance. Liam Beaumont, in stark contrast, was an island of absolute calm. He had not moved aggressively yet. The space around him had become his own. He gently guided Sophia to stand slightly behind him, a gesture so subtle yet so profoundly significant. It was a non-verbal declaration. The assault is over. You are safe now. I am here. For Sophia, tucked into the shelter of his presence, the world began to come back into focus. She looked at Liam's back, at the strong, straight line of his shoulders, and felt a wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled her knees. It was more than relief. It was a profound, soul-deep affirmation of her worth, a feeling that had been stolen from her for so long. She wasn't a project to be fixed or a hobby to be tolerated. She was a treasure to be defended. Liam's gaze, cold and hard as chips of ice, remained fixed on Mark. He took a single deliberate step forward, and Mark flinched as if he'd been struck. "My wife was crying," Liam stated. The sentence was simple, devoid of accusation or anger, yet it carried the weight of a judge's final verdict. "When I arrived, I saw tears on her face. I have a strong suspicion, Mr. Peterson, that you are the reason for that." Mark's throat worked, but no sound emerged. He desperately searched for a response, a denial, an excuse. He could try to say it was a misunderstanding, that it was just old history between exes. But he knew, looking into the unwavering abyss of Liam Beaumont's eyes, that lies would not work here. This man was not interested in excuses. He was interested in facts, and the only fact that mattered was Sophia's pain. Liam's voice dropped even lower, becoming a chillingly intimate current that was meant to flay Mark where he stood. "There's a specific kind of weakness I've encountered in my life, Mr. Peterson. It's not the honest weakness of failure or the humble weakness of admitting a mistake. It's a rot. It's the corrosive weakness of a man who can only measure his own height by kneeling on someone else's back." He paused, letting the words sink in, letting the onlookers absorb the brutal poetry of his indictment. "I've heard stories about men like you," he continued, his tone methodical, like a surgeon making precise incisions. "Men whose own sense of self is so fragile, so pathetically small, that the only way they can feel big is by tearing down the women who were once brave enough to love them. You build your little kingdom on the rubble of someone else's confidence, you puff out your chest, and you demand applause for your sad little construction. It's a very limited way to live." Every word was a perfectly aimed arrow, striking not just Mark's pride, but the very foundation of his identity. Mark had spent his entire life curating his image as a winner, a successful man, a provider. In less than a minute, Liam Beaumont had stripped all of that away, exposing the hollow, insecure core beneath. Brittany, who had clung to Mark's arm like a designer accessory all night, finally seemed to grasp the cataclysmic scale of the disaster. Her face was a mask of horror. This wasn't the powerful man she thought she had married. This was a fraud, and his fraudulence had just incurred the wrath of a god. She began tugging frantically at Mark's arm, her painted nails digging into his sleeve. "Mark, let's go. Please, just leave it." But Mark was paralyzed, held captive by a force he could neither fight nor comprehend. As if sensing the need for a final decisive blow, Liam's gaze shifted from Mark, flicking over to Todd Gable, who was attempting to melt into the floral wallpaper. The shift in attention was so sudden, so unexpected, that Todd froze like a deer in headlights. "Gable," Liam said, his tone becoming deceptively casual, the quiet danger beneath it more pronounced than ever. "Your firm Harrison & Reed has a pitch meeting with my acquisitions team on Tuesday morning, correct, for the Henderson Tower contract?" Todd's world tilted on its axis. The Henderson Tower contract was the biggest deal his firm had pursued in 5 years. His entire team had logged thousands of hours on it. His own promotion was unofficially contingent on its success. He could only manage a choked, squeaking nod, his face now glistening with a sheen of cold sweat. Liam held his gaze for a long, torturous moment, a silent message passing between the two men. Then he delivered the killing blow. "I'll have my assistant check in on Monday to see if that meeting is still necessary." The threat was unspoken but deafening. It was a masterclass in corporate warfare deployed in a country club ballroom. You stand with him, you fall with him. The choice is yours. Todd Gable understood perfectly. He took a large involuntary step away from Mark, then another, the physical movement a desperate act of disassociation. He was severing ties, saving himself. In that moment, Mark wasn't just an old high school buddy. He was a contagion. Finally, Liam turned his full attention back to the woman who was the entire reason he was there. The Arctic coldness in his expression vanished, melting away in an instant, replaced by the deep, unwavering warmth and love that Sophia knew so well. He reached for her hand, his fingers lacing through hers, a simple act of possession and protection. "Come on, my love," he said softly, his voice once again for her ears only. He leaned in, ignoring the dozens of eyes on them, and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "My wife and I are leaving." He put a deliberate, gentle emphasis on the words, "my wife," a final, definitive claim in front of the man who had deemed her disposable. It was a quiet declaration that Sophia was not a failed artist or an unstable runaway. She was the cherished partner of a man who could buy and sell Mark's entire world before breakfast. "This place," he added with a hint of disdain, "has a rather unpleasant atmosphere." Without a second glance at the ruin he had wrought, Liam led Sophia toward the exit. The crowd, a silent, mesmerized sea of faces, parted for them as if by royal decree. The whispers started before the doors even swung shut behind them, a frantic, excited hum of gossip, shock and awe. They had come for nostalgia and cheap drinks. They had witnessed a public execution. As Sophia walked, her hand held securely in Liam's, she felt the last 10 years of shame and self-doubt slough off her like a heavy coat. She wasn't fleeing. She was ascending. The doors closed, and the full weight of the aftermath crashed down upon Mark Peterson. The protective silence that Liam's presence had commanded was gone, replaced by a cacophony of judgment. People were turning away from him, moving off in pairs and small groups, their expressions ranging from pity to outright contempt. He was no longer the center of attention. He was the object of scorn. Brittany ripped her arm away from his, her face contorted in a mask of fury and humiliation. "What have you done?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time she didn't see the confident, successful man he pretended to be. She saw a small, petty bully who had picked a fight with a giant and brought ruin upon them both. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stalked away, leaving him utterly and completely alone. Mark stood there, a solitary island in a sea of his own, making the architect of his own spectacular demise. The king had been dethroned, his kingdom revealed to be nothing more than a house of cards in a hurricane. And the silence that surrounded him now was the loudest sound he had ever heard. That night, Sophia didn't just close a chapter. She burned the entire book. The power Mark held over her wasn't real. It was a phantom built from old fears and his own deep-seated insecurities. Seeing him crumble, not under a display of wealth, but under the quiet, protective love of a good man, was the ultimate vindication. Liam's power wasn't in his billions. It was in his character, in the way he saw her, valued her, and stood by her, without hesitation. She had spent years rebuilding her life brick by brick into a beautiful fortress, and that night Liam had simply stood on the ramparts with her and shown everyone the queen she had become. Mark had tried to shame her for her past, but in doing so he only succeeded in illuminating the brilliance of her present and the utter desolation of his own empty existence. If this story of resilience, love, and sweet, sweet karma resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. Your support means the world. Don't forget to hit that share button to spread the story, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you won't miss our next tale of truth and triumph. Thank you for listening.